Okay, I've played a lot. I've made so much. It must be kind of overwhelming, but also kind of fun, and that feeling.
It's very fun.
Good.
It feels rebellious. Making a mess feels rebellious.
Ooh, is there a bit of rebellion in your art?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say,
Everything is rebellious.
but you feel so punk rock as well. I think there's such a punk energy to you, and I see that in your art. Good day and welcome to Culture Ventures. My name is EJ, and on this show we look at art and artists who bring joy to the Tampa Bay area. My guest today is Nicole Persley. Hello, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
I am so excited to speak with you. We've spoke a little bit before the interview started. You are such a character. You have such a background, such a history in art, in this just culture. I'm so excited to get into very nitty-gritty details with you, but keep it light and keep it fun. One of my first questions, tell me about your origin story. Much like a superhero, we all have origin stories of how we got here. What is your artist origin story? What was your early inspirations? What got you to this place?
I have a very active imagination naturally. So, I mean, I can't imagine not being creative. I've been that way ever since I can remember. And when I was in high school, I would sometimes retreat to my room, put on music, break out a sketch pad, and just start drawing shapes with colors. And it was, I didn't know it at the time, but it was actually like self-care therapy, you know, very like healing. Mm-hmm. And I got so into it. I mean, that was just like my happy place that I decided to major in art. So I was accepted to the University of Michigan Art School.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's where I completed my BFA, Bachelor's of Fine Arts. And then I even went to grad school in Los Angeles for my master's.
Oh, you're a very educated artist as well. I love that background. I am a film school kid who went through the same thing. Mine is in science, though. As someone who made film, I was like, why am I a bachelor's in science? I'll take it. But I love that you're a bachelor's in fine arts. So I have to ask, when did art become a reality for you? When did you see it become from a hobby to like a full-on lifestyle? When did that transition happen?
When I was in LA in grad school, I actually started supporting myself with my art on Venice Beach. I was like one of those artists that the crowd loves to come watch. And my technique is particularly interesting because I paint flat, usually. Back then it was exclusively I was pouring paint, which is now kind of like trending.
Yeah.
You know, everyone likes to watch that. It was interesting to watch. I mean, I'd have like this rainbow of paint bottles behind me, and I was pouring paint and working on like 5 paintings at once, and people would gather around, and on a really good day, someone would end up buying an original.
I don't think people understand how much for an artist, once you start getting money for what you're doing, what that does to your brain. I don't think it validates us because usually as artists, you're like, baby, I'm making art. I'm an artist. Yeah. But that moment of making money, so was that kind of the spark of being like, I could do this? This is a future
I
for me.
remember the moment I sold my first painting, and it was like, I knew that was like a very big deal. At that time.
Oh, I love it. That just gave me goosebumps of that moment. I think we all have that moment of being like, oh, I'm in this.
Yeah.
So I don't know much about your art style and your mediums and what you use. So tell me about that. What's your medium? What kind of tools do you play with? Where do you like to create at? So give me some of that background.
Well, I'm really mixed media. I mean, I call myself a painter. I am self-taught despite having gone all the way to grad school, because I don't paint like, you know, a typical painter. I don't use brushes. My tools are making my own thick silicone paint, making an outline, and then using fluid paint. So in order to achieve what I do, it has to be flat, and it takes a very long time to dry. So anywhere I am, I will make it my creative space. In my house, whether I rent a formal studio, even when I have a studio, at my house, you will find paintings on every table in the house.
Well, you're like, I'm going to curate where I can curate, which is how it should be. Is it messy?
Yes and no.
I was curious about you're describing it. I'm like, as someone who loves a mess, I think that's especially when you're curating. I love when it looks like it's a tornado in there. Is that how it feels a little bit?
Yeah, but I also like I flip houses like kind of as my side hustle. So there's a period where before I've redone the floors, I'll get paint everywhere, and that's when it's the most fun to paint. But then once I've like put in new floors, it's actually kind of stifling.
As someone with a stepson, I always feel bad when I'm like, I see your room's messy and you're playing, and I don't want to stifle that creativity, but I'm also like, bro, you're gonna have to clean this up.
Yeah.
And that's how we feel as artists, probably like, okay, I've played a lot, I've made so much. It must be kind of overwhelming, but also kind of fun, and that feeling.
It's very fun.
Good.
It feels rebellious. Making a mess feels rebellious. You know?
Is there a bit of rebellion in your art?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I was going to say
everything is rebellious.
in the most, you're such a glamour, such a fun thing, but you feel so punk rock as well. I think there's such a punk energy to you, and I see that in your art. Also, it seems like you have a journey you've gone through with discovering more about your culture, your heritage. Speak about that a little bit, and speak about anyone who doesn't know your story, and if that plays into your art.
I'm going back to college. Ann Arbor, Michigan was really the first time I was in a community that was diverse, because I grew up in Northern Virginia, and at that time it was like farmers, and horses, and not a lot of diversity. So in Ann Arbor, I was also really into the hip hop scene. People would just start asking me like what my ethnic background was, and I rocked a different look back then, so I was just like, I don't know. I mean, I'm just like from the South. I don't know. And I got asked that question so often that when I finished college, I started researching my genealogy. I went all the way down to Macon, Georgia, where I knew my dad's family was from, and I discovered that there was this huge secret that had been kept from me, that my grandfather had been passing for white. And my uncle, his full brother, did not pass for white and was celebrated as Georgia's first registered African-American architect. And he's in history books. He's like really famous. Yeah. And I didn't know this. So what else was going on simultaneously is like the art I was making, a lot of people were critiquing it and saying, this has like a Picasso-esque feel from his series that he sort of borrowed from African masks and was influenced heavily by like tribal art, and that was coming out in my art. So I feel like before I really made that huge realization, like I knew
something was speaking to you.
Yeah.
I would say I see a lot of your work, and there's a bit of a Basquiat there vibe as well. Was Basquiat ever like an influence? Did you see these black curators and be like something? You talked about liking hip hop. You felt that there was something probably calling to you.
Yeah, definitely. I love Basquiat. I love him, but I didn't know. I wasn't really like following him in college. I mean, I knew who he was, but like recently I've seen his show and I was just blown away. It was like one of the best shows ever.
One of those artists that I'm like, man, if he could have made it a bit further, what we could have seen from Basquiat's work.
Yeah.
I mean, especially with, racial tensions in the night. Yeah. I mean, there's so much art and so much thing to be said there. And a very political artist as well. Yeah. I was going to say, I feel all art is political. I think all art is a self-expression, but your work has a very signature political flair to it. We'll talk about a bit of the Macon and all that, your family history, but I'm going to talk about your political side of your art. I know you did something about with a voter awareness. You've also done a lot of political messages. Do you feel political messages in art is important to you?
Well, yeah, I think it is. I think, you have to be able to express, and with all the censorship that's going on right now, it absolutely should. You got to push back on that. I mean,
it's usually artists who do it.
Right.
When the world gets the most hectic, it's the artists who speak up. So it's interesting that you've moved around a bunch, but Florida seems to be somewhere you always come back to. It seems.
Yeah.
You know, what about Florida inspires you? What about, you know, this area inspires you other than our somewhat nice weather?
Yeah.
It's a lie, Floridians. We don't have great weather here. I don't know what they're saying to you.
The weather did attract me because I was coming from Los Angeles.
Oh,
So
you're
after
right.
LA, I moved to New York.
Okay.
And I was going to go back and forth, New York, Florida, New York, Florida. And I was really focused on getting New York representation.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And then I came to Florida for the winter, and I started meeting all these New York art collectors. I'm like, I don't really need to live in New York to make a New York impact, like make the connections I need. So I also like met my ex-husband, who was an art collector, got married, had a baby, and was stuck here for a while. But now it's like the place I've lived the longest of any place I've ever lived. And I bounce around Florida, but I've been in Florida since like the 90s.
Yeah, you seem like you've gone around, you know, different Florida cities. Do you feel Florida has put any inspiration into your work?
Yeah, I would say so. Especially when I first arrived in Florida. If you look at my earlier pieces in that era, I definitely started painting more tropical scenes. I was doing like, you can see palm trees. Like my jazz series, there'll be a trumpet player with like a palm tree in his background and beach scenes, and so for sure.
Yeah, but you've seemed to grow so much beyond that. You're so, and I mean this positively, so abstract with your work.
Oh, yeah.
It's so loud and fun, and it's eye-catching. Now, it seems like Florida isn't always welcoming to artists.
No.
Sometimes we are a state, specifically a city sometimes in the Tampa Bay area, that wants to say they love art, but it's not always the most friendly. Do you find more self-expression outside of here? Do you find it a
Outside
little
of
bit...
Tampa
Yeah,
specifically?
specifically, or even outside of Florida, do you find it's a little easier for you to be as wildly creative as you can be?
I don't want to bash Tampa or Florida, but I will say Florida has some really horrible rules happening, policies, laws being made that definitely impact me as an artist and what I want to paint. And it's actually inspired me to paint it more and to delve in it more and explore it more. And that's the rebellion in me.
That's that punk
Like,
rock
you
I
know,
told you.
You tell me I can't do something, I'm going to make sure I do it like twice as long.
And louder.
Yes,
And prouder. Yep.
Exactly. So obviously that's at my core.
Yeah, again, you're so punk. I that's what I love about it. I just love that you're like, tell me I can't do it. I'm going to do it in your face now.
Yeah.
And not even in a mean way, but it's I have to talk about this way. And I think that's very important. Now, it seems like Macon, Georgia is an area you're falling more in love with. It seems like
yeah.
we've talked about it a little bit beforehand too. What about it draws you there? What about the art scene, other than just family history? We'll talk about family, but what about that has drawn you in? Does it feel more welcoming as an artist?
I am so warmly embraced and loved by the community there. I've never experienced that anywhere like Macon. I mean, and they invite me to this past February, I was a speaker for their centennial celebration at Wesleyan College, at one of their museums, and then like as a guest speaker for Memorial Day, where my family is buried in one of the historically black cemeteries. The historians there, they really want to know my story, and that's so refreshing because I've gotten a lot of pushback just telling my story, and sadly and recently I can't talk about my family's story in a public place. Some of it gets censored. And I'm not complaining, and I love the support I've gotten, but it inspired one of my latest series.
Yeah, let's talk about some of your latest series.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to put it down to just the paper bag work, but these brown paper bag paintings they scream to me.
Okay.
There's just something that's so interesting about them. We spoke about a little bit before about colorism. Can you explain to these paintings what they mean to you and a little bit about your actual work? Because your work, I can't wait to talk about your work now. It's so impressive. So can you at least first about the paper bag?
Okay, so the brown paper bag historically was used during like the Jim Crow era to measure if a person was light enough to be in places of privilege, high-end department store, like certain, actually, many HBCUs and historical foundations used this. It was cruel, but like the story behind my family, it's so closely connected, and I started like putting images of my family on the bags, and I was trying to show like the bag as like, you know, the symbol of everything that they represented. At the same time, I wanted to talk about that history that we're not supposed to talk about, you know, in a way that a lot of people who are suppressing the history, it wouldn't register.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of have to know what it means for it to really get the full impact of the symbol, the symbolism.
It almost feels like you're playing a prank sometimes, where you're like, I'm doing something that you guys aren't even aware of.
Yes.
And I think that's such a refreshing feeling.
Right. I mean, it's also sensitive because not everyone passed the brown bag test. So, I mean, there's a lot of pain associated with this. And it was a cruel test. It was horrible. But it needs to be talked about. I think when you talk about it, it heals. And it's still super relevant.
Yeah. Sometimes wounds won't heal if they're closed up.
Right.
You need that open air to let them breathe. And that's what I think you're doing with these pieces. They're saying so much. And like you said, the ones who get it, and the ones who don't. And that's such an important part of art. Because art's a weird thing where it's the idea of you're making this for you, but it also has to be mass consumed. It's not like a movie where it's made to be mass consumed, but it works for you. It's almost opposite with painting and artwork. Do you find any of these other pieces really kind of speak to that as well? Is there a piece here that you find really calls out your signature stuff?
Well, you see these little paintings of like the faces.
Yes.
There's the name of it's a very simple name. They're called girl face, and they're actually, I consider all of those self-portraits, although anything you make is a self-portrait technically as an artist.
Ooh. I like that.
The faces are simple, but they also have a lot of like symbolism in them and references, you know, and they're playful, and the colors, they look childlike, but if you scratch the surface, you know, no pun intended, it's not, it's very deep, and there's like a lot of like really like intense feeling that goes into it.
They're interesting works like that where they feel simple in that way, but you look at it and you can already tell there's more story behind it. And I think that's what we all want as artists, to see something and you're like, I get it at first. You look at it for a couple more minutes and you're like, oh,
yeah,
I'm getting more and more. Can you speak about this little wonderful unicorn right here, which I adore?
Yeah, thank you. That's Trixie.
Ooh.
Trixie, it's a boy.
Okay, hello, Mr. Trixie.
And he's my unicorn. You know, unicorns are considered good luck and very auspicious symbols. And I just I made that as fun. You know, I smile when I talk about it.
Yeah.
That's what I mean when I say art's my happy place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just painting stuff that's like really fun is super important, not always to be like really heavy.
Yeah, I was gonna say sometimes as artists, I feel you may want to be serious all the time, and it feels like if you're playful, will they not take you seriously? I think there's a balance there sometimes, and I think you found that balance perfectly.
Oh,
You have a playful quality, but each time you're like, ooh, there's something under that, which I love. I love that. Is there a particular piece of art that speaks to you that's not even your own art? Is there a piece of art that you saw throughout your life that has really called to you?
Well, I love Basquiat. I love pop art. I love Warhol. You know, all the great masters. Like, I'm into abstract modern art. I did a paper on Helen Frankenthaler, who was like an abstract expressionist in the 60s. And she broke a lot of barriers as a woman artist during that time. There's so many artists I could name.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's...
No,
you know,
I think it's very interesting.
It's like saying, what's your favorite Prince song? I mean, come on.
Oh, I saw you've been to a couple Prince shows as well. What's your favorite Prince song?
No.
Oh, no?
We can't do that. No.
I would say they just redid Diamonds and Pearls, and I just got to re-listen to that. I'm like, What an album.
Well,
An album no one really even goes to a lot of time. Oh, I cannot wait to talk about music with you as well. we need to do a whole show about music. So yeah, your art's really interesting. Is there a certain type of art you like playing with that you don't get to normally? You talk about mixed media. Is there another media? Is there any filmmaking you want to do? Is there any what else is there that speaks to you in the art
I
world?
mean, I have dabbled in like a lot of different mediums, and I've in college I was actually producing hip hop, and I go back to it every now and then. Like then I did spoken word. I was working with a couple of groups in Chicago, believe it or not, and that's what got me to LA because I met some music people, and I ended up being an intern for. I'm not going to name drop, but a very important person's brother was starting his own label, and I was his intern.
Well, that's awesome.
He's a dear friend of mine.
You've lived many lives, it seems.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So again, is there anything you plan on exploring a little bit? Is there movies? Is there books? Like, you're such a visual person, but is there ways that you want to get your stories out in different ways?
Okay, so that's the cover for my book.
Mm-hmm.
That should be finished any day now. Then there's a documentary that's been in the works with several different people. I keep changing, but I found a really amazing documentary maker in Macon, and I didn't have to ask them. They came to me.
It really feels like Macon has called to you. Can you speak about, what was it, your uncle?
Yeah.
And his story and why you feel like you want to push that out? I think that's so wonderful that you want to honor your legacy, but by also putting out your work as well. I love I want to speak about my family, but I still want to put out art. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, it's not just my uncle. It's like his parents, their parents. Like the history is truly like fascinating, and volumes, and they were really important in that town. And I'm celebrating every single one of them, which is why I'm trying to get the house that they grew up in and convert it into a museum. And that's like, I know I will make that happen. I don't know when, there's a lot of moving parts, but I know I'm going to make that happen and honor them and give back to this community. The community specifically is called Pleasant Hill. And there were so many incredible people that came from Little Richard, Otis Redding, my uncle. There's streets that are called Persley Street, named after my great-grandfather.
Wow.
And then the other name is Bond, and that's going way back.
Yeah.
But that town is so full of relevant stories directly connected to my family, and I mean my grandparent, not just like an ancestor. Like that's kind of immediate family.
Yeah, when I was doing some research on you, I thought it was further back.
Right.
So finding out how close it is, that proximity, it really feels like this town has called to you from a distance. And I love to hear that they've embraced you, especially when sometimes it feels like Florida doesn't want to embrace artists. As someone who works in the film industry here, sometimes it doesn't feel like Florida knows what to do with any artist, let alone a painter, filmmaker. So it's just interesting you found a calling, a place that wants you.
Yeah.
Do you feel like at home there?
Yes, a very dear and important person that I've met there is a historian, and his family also has like major stories connected. Our families are interconnected, and he calls it my ancestral home. His name's Dr. Thomas Duval, and he's considered the town's historian.
It's just, your story is so interesting. I love hearing about your art, but something about your story is just as powerful as your art, and I love that you're putting it out there. I want to know what else you have in the development. What else are you cooking up? We talked about a documentary, we talked about a book, but what about art? Is there any exhibits you're doing? Is there any, local stuff that we can find?
Well, I just did a one-woman show at the Robert Saunders Library here in Tampa.
And how does that work for you? What's your one-woman show kind of consist of?
It was all about my family. I was telling their history, but not on brown bags.
Okay. Ooh.
I love Robert Saunders Library.
Okay, but no, I absolutely agree. I know what you mean. No, it's just interesting that you've actually found ways to speak this out and do it. Do you find it's important to just talk about this?
Yeah.
Getting this message out?
Absolutely. Of course it is. Don't you? I mean,
Absolutely.
we have to. This show is fantastic. I mean, artists need a platform, and we need our voices heard, because, you know, I'm gonna hit a lot of nerves. I say this all the time, but
That's
it's
what art's
also
supposed to do, though.
yeah, it's also gonna touch someone or some people that are inspired, and then they're gonna be like, hey, I could do that. Let me try.
If it makes me angry, it makes you happy, and that's kind of how it should be. If that's how I feel as a film critic. Sometimes I'm like, if everyone liked this movie, it would be so boring.
Yeah.
If you need that little bit of anger, you need that little bit of pushback, it fuels you as an artist. I want to ask you, I want to give you this moment to speak to any young artist. Can you speak to them? Can you give a message to any young artist trying to figure out their voice, trying to maybe feel suppressed by where they are?
Anytime someone has told you you can't or you shouldn't or don't do this, push back and do what you want to do, as long as you're not harming yourself or anyone else. You know,
I like that. I like that little bit of an asterisk
PSA,
there.
public service announcement.
Yeah, no, you never want to hurt anyone or hurt anything, but you got to, you know, what was the expression? You got to like crack some eggs to make an omelet kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like you do that, and I feel like you've cracked a couple eggs,
Yeah.
and you've made that mess. But guess what? That mess is so important. And I really feel like you've done something very interesting with your work.
Well, thank
very
you.
interesting with your platform. Again, I think most people realize that point of privilege you have, and using that point of privilege to then speak about history. I don't think you understand what even that means to a lot of other people. You know, you're taking how you look, getting yourself into doors that maybe other people wouldn't get into. And I want to applaud you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
And what you're trying to get out,
Well-
and the story that, again, you know, hearing the story, I'm like, what do you mean the first registered architect? You know, I want to learn about that.
Well, not only was he the first registered architect in the state of Georgia, he was directly recruited by Booker T. Washington to build the original campus at Tuskegee. His partner, Robert Taylor, and he formed the nation's first black architecture firm, Taylor and Persley. He built Masonic temples. He was a Mason. You know, his partner was the first MIT graduate, first African-American MIT graduate. All these firsts. And see, the thing that worries me about what's happening right now is that, and I commend you and thank you for allowing me to speak on your show, because I've noticed that like a lot of the younger generation, it's not just like who you think it is suppressing history, but they don't want to talk about stuff that is like a painful story.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant. It's becoming irrelevant, but it's not irrelevant, because these victories and these triumphs can be celebrated. I have gained a new sense of self-awareness, connecting with what my family achieved, that I find empowering. And, you know, art was my original happy place and self-care healing place, but the research I do in getting them recognition, that is like...
That's more self-care than anything.
It's like the most healing thing I've ever done. And it's so fulfilling. And like, it needs to be written down, it needs to be told, because if I don't do it, it's lost and it's gone forever. It was almost gone forever.
Well, it's not anymore.
Yeah.
You're keeping it alive. This show allowed you to speak about it. So thank you, Nicole, for speaking with me today. I think people are going to hear your story and feel something so special, so powerful about what you're doing here. So I want to thank you for speaking with us. I want to thank you for being so open. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into our show today. Culture Ventures is a show where we talk about art, but art is way more than that. Art is how we feel inside, our family history. It's the punk rock rebellion, as we mentioned before. So thank you so much for tuning in. My name is EJ, and thank you for watching Culture Ventures.
Hi, I'm Nicole Persley, and you're watching Tampa Bay Community Network.